And checking in with you. There you go. You got that. Perfect. Sam, I tried to make sure I was choosing relevant local native bees in the graphic. I did my I tried
One
to.
of our links is to a collection of Maryland bees.
Awesome.
In the million link thing that I sent that you can always go to, and it's all separated by species and whatnot. If you, for whatever reason, or anyone wants a specific bee picture of local stuff. And then you'll see, I think, a link to eye candy folder, which is just really fabulous looking ones.
Yeah, I've been enjoying your Flickr account. We'll make sure people know about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Or Instagram is really more approachable for most people because a lot of people are on Instagram. But, you know, I have a slide, I think, at the end that has information. And then, you know, we could just leave that up and go to questions.
Okay. Amanda, do you see the admit all button or no?
Yes, I do.
Mine is hiding from me, so I'm admitting folks individually. It would be easier to do it in one big deal. Hi, everybody. We're going to get rolling here momentarily. We're just trying to get the folks that are trying to join actually in the virtual room. Those of you who are here and can hear me, and I will try to mention this again. We are pretty informal with these things, but I'll just speak about kind of the structure. After a real brief introduction, I'm going to hand things over to our guest, but we encourage you to do a few things. Introduce yourself in chat, mention whether you are, you know, a farmer or a researcher, that kind of thing, just so we know who's here. Feel free to come on camera if you wish, and to leave yourself on mute unless you need to speak to the group. That way we sort of minimize background noise. We will get through the bulk of the material by 12:30, and then those of you who can stick around a little bit longer can ask some additional questions up until about 12:45. I'm going to give it one more minute to get folks here.
And Elizabeth, you have a place where the recording will be put up. Is that right?
Yes, and I'll mention that.
Cool.
Sure will. All right, I'll go ahead and get rolling. I'm really glad everybody could be here today. I appreciate you joining us and taking a little bit of time out of a wonderful weather Wednesday where I am. My name is Elizabeth Beggins. I am the Agriculture Outreach Specialist for the Million Acre Challenge. And that is a collaborative project which is supported by American Farmland Trust, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and Future Harvest, in addition to many other ag partners across the region. Our goal to advance soil health and regenerative agriculture on 1 million acres by 2030 is a goal we really hope you will all help us support in whatever ways are accessible to you. I mentioned this already, but some have come in since, so just a little housekeeping. Please keep yourself muted unless you need to make a public comment. I would encourage you to hold most of your verbal questions until the end and use the chat for things that are happening during Sam's presentation. And we will have some time for Q&A later. Go ahead and also use chat to introduce yourself. Tell us kind of what hat you're wearing today. If you're a researcher, a farmer, a gardener, you want to be a farmer, whatever it is that brought you here today. And that helps us kind of know who's taking part in these events. Just a few quick highlights about the Million Acre Challenge featured on this slide. We are involved along with PASA, which is PASA Sustainable Agriculture based in Pennsylvania, in a soil health benchmark study, which is a long-term study that is actually this year expanding from Maine to the Carolinas. So we're going to be looking at getting data from quite a number of farms. We have a number of networking opportunities that bring farmers into connection with each other. This is one of them. We also offer a monthly newsletter. We have practice implementation funding and technical support that comes through our collaborative, and through American Farmland Trust, we have economic case studies which are available, and one of those is actually just out, so keep your eyes open for that in our upcoming newsletter. As always, the main thing I want you to know is that we're a farmer-focused organization, and we really believe that farmers are the ones with the expertise, that they're mostly already working to steward the land, and our goal is to really help them do that. If you wish to have your camera on, you're welcome to. It always kind of makes us feel a little homier, and especially towards the end as we get towards our Q&A. We'd love for you to engage with us beyond this event. And this slide gives you some ways to think about how to do that. These lunch and learns happen the second Wednesday of every month. A monthly newsletter, as I mentioned, will be circulating to you after your involvement with this. And it really is a kind of a comprehensive soil health look around the region. So news, funding opportunities, and regional events is what you can find there. We have some funding opportunities for farmers. Those are the second and third QR codes that are on this slide. And we'd love for you to take a look at those if they are relevant. All right, this is a fun one, because this is when I get to lean towards not talking and move towards letting our guest be your guide. A little bit about Sam Droege. He's a wildlife biologist. He grew up in Hyattsville, Maryland, and has always been interested in nature. He's worked at the USGS Patuxent Wildlife Research Center since 1978, and he now works to support research on native bees and stem some of the losses to wild things that come with population growth, wealth, and disconnection from nature. Sam also has a really long list of additional accomplishments that he insisted nobody else cared about, and so they're not included on this slide, but that QR code there will take you to his bio on the USGS website if you want to see more. Sam and the team at the Interagency Bee Lab do not do primary research, so they're not investigating causes for decline in bees, that kind of thing. Instead, they are developing survey techniques, identification guides. They're supporting outside groups with bee identification. They're looking at the relationship between specific bees and specific plants that are on the lab grounds. And they're advising and consulting with hundreds of different bee biologists from around the world. Sam, you are, I'm lucky enough that you are a personal friend, but also a real expert in this field, and it's an honor to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We don't have much time, so let's roll. Elizabeth only gave me 20 minutes. Usually I get an hour to say that we don't know that much about bees that we can compress into an hour. So we're going to do this in 20 minutes, but we're going to concentrate on relationship of farm fields, agricultural products, and bees, looking primarily at the native species. Okay, next. So we're going to talk about what I call the invisible bees, which are the many species of bees that are not honeybees, carpenter bees, or bumblebees. Next. I'll do this, Elizabeth. This is my signal.
Okay.
Okay, so first we do have to talk about the bee everybody knows. So everyone knows the honeybee starting as a child. And it is incredibly important, and it is incredibly intermingled with our cultural backgrounds. And it is a very bad model for how the native bees work. So basically, it's so distant from how our native species work that the best way to think about it is anything you know about honeybees, you need to forget, because the native bees, which we don't have time to talk about, are doing really different things. Next. I mean, we'll address some of these things in general. So these invisible bees are actually very speciose. So there's many species. So we look at the US, roughly 4,000, maybe 10% don't have names yet, which is a problem, right? We don't know what they are. We look at California, Texas, east of the Mississippi, Maryland. So let's now getting local 450 different species of bees and moving up as we learn more and do more and more surveys. So they're very, let's call it under-surveyed. So we find new species every year, not because they're new to the science, but because they've never been recorded in Maryland, not because they just moved to Maryland. It's just got to be at the right place at the right time, as we'll take a peek at. PG County, for example, 300 species. Why? I live there, I work there. That's why PG County had, which is, a good county. There's lots of things in there. So most counties should be upwards of 200, no problem. Many are not according to their lists because we haven't done enough surveys. It's not like bird watchers. Bird watchers know every bird that comes into the state, but not bee people because there are no bee watchers. Okay, next, because most of the identification. So I'll let you just page through these, Elizabeth. So this is just an introduction. We don't have time to talk about species, but I want you to just have an understanding that the diversity of, you can go a smidge faster, the diversity of native bees is huge. Those first 3 green bees, they're in your backyard, almost every single one of them. And what we're seeing is a very tight relationship between sets of plants and sets of bees. A lot are highly specialized, some 1-to-1. This species of plant has this species of bee. More generally, you have a lot of relationship between a set of bees, a bee or set of bees, and a genus of plants. Like I only go to Helianthus, so the sunflower group. And then you have, it extends out towards generalists who might be out the entire year rather than just when their plant's blooming. And those may pollinate quite a few plants, but they also, including honeybees, have strong preferences to which of the smorgasbord of plants we have that they might come and visit and take the pollen and nectar. Every single one of them, vegetarian, uses pollen and nectar in some way to generate the next generation. So you're seeing all this diversity. Many of those species are about the size of a grain of rice or smaller. That's the bulk of bees. The bulk of bees are very small and are bypassed by most people because it doesn't meet the model of what a honeybee looks like, which is people's model mostly, or a bumblebee. And so they're overlooked as a bug or a fly. But if you look at your flowers, you're going to see those bees. They're also small enough, they don't need that much pollen. The pollen grain size per unit of bee is pretty advantageous. They don't need to gather that much to progenerate. Progenerate, is that a word? To procreate whatever another baby bee. Roughly 5 flowers have as enough pollen and nectar to produce another bee. Okay, so I could go on, but I have to stop because Elizabeth has only given me 20 minutes. So let's look at a landscape. This is south of Denton, randomly pulled this out here. And what you see is a matrix, as we have pretty much everywhere, of forest and fields and people's houses and roads and other many kinds of land uses. Okay. So if we look at, can you see my cursor at all, Elizabeth, or anyone?
I cannot. Oops,
You cannot?
I did not mean to do that. There we go.
Okay, so, that's right, because you're in charge. I forgot.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so anyway, we'll discuss this further. But you see the red arrow on the map. There you go. Elizabeth can do it. And so we're going to use the Google Earth features that just allows us to go to that spot, and we're going to talk about what's going on here. But before we do, I just want to mention that these forested areas act as your biodiversity reservoirs, a bank, so to speak, of many kinds of plants and animals that are not occurring elsewhere in this very man-dominated landscape. So we periodically pull from that bank. So the animals leave. So bees, for example, will leave from nesting or existing part of the time within your banks, your natural areas, and move into your fields, orchards, and vegetable gardens. So let's go to the next page. So we're going to that red spot. So that red spot is a orchard, part of an orchard. I don't know, that might be peach, which oddly is mostly self-pollinated, but has increased productivity if bees visit the flowers, which is a theme. And we're going to get to that theme with soybeans, interestingly enough. Okay, what are we looking at from a bee eye? So to the right, young Long Valley pine forest, forget it. There's nothing in there. There are no flowers in there. The understory is bare. It's a biological desert, so to speak, for them. So we could talk about the meaning of planting those kinds of things, but it lacks diversity of plants and therefore it lacks diversity of bees. In this case, absolutely none. If we look at the ground, it's very closely mown. And what we have is maybe some very small flowers that a very limited subset of bees. There are some that will use those small flowers and are like lawns. We're okay with that. But largely, it's not supporting most of the bees that might be going to an orchard crop, for example, or to anything else for that matter. There is some nesting opportunity there, just like in row crops, there's nesting opportunities. But usually bees can find some place to nest no matter what. So we'll leave it like that, except to say in the background, way in the back there is a row of trees. And if we go back to the map, which we will see that those trees are the forest bank. So what's happening, that's where a lot of these bee species are. And in the spring, when you have blooming orchard crops, a lot of those bees are doing their thing, looking for some amelanchier, some serviceberry, a little blueberry that might be in that forest. And then, but they can also see that in those orchards is an incredible amount of bloom of plants that are very similar to the native plants. Some are native. Blueberries, for example, that's a native crop. Sunflowers would be too. But in the orchard world, it's a simplified system. We call them party plants, apple, peach, plum, and blackberries even are all have counterparts. Some are exactly the same species in the wild, and the bees and the plants don't specialize. Open flower, lots of pollen and nectar, not a lot of secondary compounds to repel anything. Everybody moves in. So they're going to move out of the woods and they're going to move into those fields. Some might nest there, but they are going to have to leave because mostly those systems of orchard crops, week and a half, the bloom's done. The bees need more than a week and a half. So they have to find additional resources. If you have a complex system of blooming orchard crops with different time periods, maybe they can pull it all off in your orchard. But usually what's happening is they go back to the woods and they disperse to find additional pollen and nectar to do their other broods. So again, we get back to this stewardship of these wild areas, including very small ones, bees are small, are going to lead to better productivity, better pollination in your systems. Note, I'm not talking about honeybees. So this, largely in Maryland, we don't have to use honeybees to affect pollination of small orchards like this because we do have natural areas. All these wet spots in the area, basically unplowable, become this reservoir of bees that move in to the surrounding areas when it's useful for them. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to go back here, same place, but now we're going to look across the road. So you can see again, there's woods around that initial spot, and that's where the bees are coming from to move into these field areas, which largely can't support completely bee activity. And in other words, a bee cannot pull off its entire lifespan in most man-made environments with a tiny, remember 450 species, a tiny exception. Mostly it's an interaction between forests, wild fields, edges, and the highly managed area. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to see this area along Towers Road, which is basically a forest. Okay, so here's your capacity. Now, each forest is different because the plant composition varies. So each plant has a different relationship with bees. Some have no relationship. So in here, you can see things like holly, highly used by bees. A lot of the oaks used, but not very often. And then we can go through that list and create a what is used in here. Just as an aside, by June, this system is shut down too for bees because there's nothing blooming anymore. But in the spring, and this is why it's magic for orchard crops, there's a lot of bees in these areas. On average, we estimate that 26,000 bees per year are produced on an acre. That's the average, varies all over the place, and is a wildly back of the envelope estimate. But just to point out, there are a lot of bees out there, and they can affect your pollination. And your goal should be to manage your property to maximize the side areas rather than the crop area, to bring in bees and to support them when your crop is not in bloom, and to do it in general, right? Because that's the right thing to do. You never know when all this biodiversity is going to come in handy, because there's many other things going on in here, predators, all kinds of other species, all being supported by the plants. 150 million years of coevolution of these plants and everything else, from bacteria, fungal populations in the soil to tree hoppers, leaf miners, bees, caterpillars. Doug Ptolemy, great talks on those. Let's go to the next page. So that's where our bank is, right? So we need to have crops. We need to have used areas. We have pleasure in lawns, but that's not supporting the environment to a large extent. Or if it is, it's basically crow and sparrow bees. Okay, so this next one is another view. Let's go to that. You can see this arrow. It's pointing towards some houses. So here we have, there's a house, maybe 4 or 5 acres in the middle of that house. On the left-hand side, there's another house. It's got some trees and it's got some stuff going on, but it's highly mowed. Like you can see they did their spring mowing already. On the right-hand side, in this spring shot, you'll see that they haven't probably got around to mowing this year. So there is probably a little bit of bloom in there. So mowing high is useful, but mowing at all is basically resetting everything. You're cutting mostly the flowers, no bees. So in a very general way, most lawns or mowed areas, including verges of the road, do not support bees. Okay, there might be some very low, but again, a small set of really tolerant and things that like weedy things. So we're going to call them crow and sparrow bees, right? Because you think about it, you don't find your rare birds like in a field like that. Okay, next. Thinking about the birds that people know a lot more and comparing it and contrasting with bees is very useful because we know more about birds, and largely the conservation issues track pretty well. We have more opportunities with bees because they're small. So here's another slide. Let's go to this one. And what we're seeing here is we're seeing agricultural crops, and we're seeing a ditch through the to pull water off. You can see there's standing water. This is, again, the spring time here. You can see that that corner to the left is probably, maybe some years it's planted and a lot of years it's not, because it's just the soils are wet. They're probably, not only poorly drained, but probably anaerobic or whatever, but they're still tended enough that there's nothing going on there. So you have the ditch systems to pull them off. So you have a couple things going on here. One, you have that hedgerow. So in that hedgerow is everything from blackberries. You can see some blooming trees in the next hedgerow over to the right. So those are supporting bees. And you can do a lot with that. So for example, you may say, I need to not have that hedgerow because it's impinging on my productivity of my crops because of overhang and other things, maybe root competition with the field edges. So I'm just going to cut it down. That's actually not bad as long as you allow things to come back to some, maybe every 3 years. So again, not time here to talk about it, but on a 3-year rotation, you'll still have like sumacs and blackberries and perennial scrubs. You could plant things like hibiscus in the ditches, again, depending on your strategy and how much flow you need to have come out of those ditches. Ditches are mini wetlands in a lot of ways. In the front, we see grass again. So again, not again, but there are cultural norms that dictate whether that's mown. So mowing grass, and if we were thinking about the last one, mown grass is always culturally acceptable. Like that's like a low bar. Planting that back or allowing sections to grow and doing anything else is a little risky because your peers may say, hey, I see you got a lot of weeds there, or what the heck's going on there? Are you too lazy to cut that? So you can put in signage, you can plant it. You usually want a strip of very tightly mown, string trimmed area in front so that you say, I did this on purpose. And you can add signs, which also basically say, look at this, this is done on purpose. But right now, that mode triangle right there, very small example, could be producing and helping support what's going on, but is not. And so, again, there's that relationship. What plants there will support certain bees and so forth.
And we have
So,
about 5 minutes of our official program.
all right.
I'll let you know.
Gosh, Elizabeth, you are such a dictator. All right, let's go to the next one then. So here's a good example of something that a lot of people may say, this is kind of junky. But look what you got. You got a native habitat of plants there, a power line coming through. Underneath that power line, you can't have trees coming up. So the power company or the landowner does things. The last thing you want to do is mow that every 2 weeks, which happens a lot in Talbot County, for example, where I spend a lot of time. I don't know who's doing it, but they're obsessed with mowing that strip down. That was a great place for bees. Now it's not. Edges of woods, a lot of light coming in from the side. That is a place where a lot of biological activity takes place beyond what's happening in the middle of the woods, which are very shaded. So this is actually a really good piece of habitat, and the landowners should be proud, but they're probably like, other people are downgrading them, like that's a little too sloppy or too little junky, but it's actually part of the education process. That's good. Next. And let's go back. Sorry, I thought I had a slide there. I want to talk about soybeans and a couple other crop things here. So let's pretend that that field back there is in soy or corn. But one thing, we talked about the orchard crops and the interactions. There's two other main groups. One would be soy. So soy is a bean. Beans have flowers. Soybeans have flowers. Everyone knows, though, soybeans self-pollinated. The answer, though, is that if a bee visits a soybean flower, depending on the type of soybean, too, as to how open to visits it is, and there are a lot of bees in soybean fields. If you go in at the bloom time, you increase productivity, in other words, yield, by 5 to 25% of those plants that got visited. So basically, free money. You don't have to put in more inputs or get fancier seed or amend your soils. You just have to bring bees in. But if you have, so at this time of year when soybeans are running, that's the middle of summer. Woods have shut down, so they're not coming in from there. They're coming in from open areas. So you need to maintain the verges, which could be the edge of the woods. It could be the back part of the fields where people don't see that you're not mowing them, which is traditionally frowned upon. It could be, integrated into your ditches. It could be integrated into your water course, your greenways in there. Lots of opportunities. But what you want, it could be your yards. What you want is a lot of summer bloom when the soy is blooming so that those bees move into your soybean field. And then, might as well be throwing dollar bills at you. So I know Elizabeth wants me to move on. So go, Elizabeth. Okay. So saving bees in the conservation stewardship lane is all about saving native flowering plants. Next. Again, a lot of complexity I'm skipping over here. Mowing during the growing season. Basically, when you mow during the growing season, if it's like, I just mowed it twice, you're cutting down the late season bloom of that thing. You're decreasing the productivity. You're asking that land to become weeds and grass, which tolerate that. Next. So rights of way are a great place. Do you need to do transmission lines? Do you need to do power lines? Yes. Do you need to do that every year? And do you need to do it during the summer? Usually the answer is no. The only reason, cultural. Okay, I am finished, Elizabeth. So here's information here about how to see some of our pictures. They're all public domain. You can do whatever you want, 5,000 of those. And to follow us on Instagram or Flickr or Tumblr. I think we also have a Facebook group. Well, I know we do. And further questions can be there. And I don't know, Amanda, were you able to dump the links into the chat? Or anyone?
Sure was.
Okay, so there's probably a boatload of links, some of which might be useful. And you can see our field guide to bees, and that would be to bee genera, because when we do species, we do it on a microscope. So I'll stop. Elizabeth.
So awesome. That was I constrained you probably more than was desired, but we got the tip of the iceberg. We have a few more minutes for folks to get some questions out. I'll just mention on this slide that this QR code takes you to a PDF of that field guide. So if you want to sort of tee that up, you can. Otherwise, these lunch and learns are recorded, and we post them in two ways. We put them in our monthly newsletters, and we have them on our YouTube channel, which is just Million Acre Challenge at YouTube. And they show up in both of those places. So, and Sam, you may want to share it on one of your channels as well.
Okay.
I'll leave that up to you. I highly encourage people to go to the Flickr account. It's just eye candy for bee species. It's incredible. All the pictures that you've seen here today is what you have access to. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, those are all public domain. So if you need.
Also, they are so public domain, we don't want you to ask for permission, because it's just a waste of our time. Because we're going to say yes to anything. You can sell them. People do. And, put horns on them or whatever, turn them into sheep, for example.
So a lot of information. Those of you who have to hop right off, thank you so much for being here, and look for the recording so that you can revisit what Sam has shared with us today. Those of you who can stick around another few minutes, we've got time to bring on our cameras and our questions, and let's let Sam's expertise go to further good work here.
Thank you. This was great. And I always notice in the yard the tinier bees. And I'm like, look, they're pollinating. They're pollinating. So it was just great to hear that we have so many species of bees here in Maryland, because I see them outside and I love seeing them.
Yeah. And, even in very urban or very, very used environments, you plant it and they will come. So, you may not have a big tree forest or residual native habitat nearby, but if you plant those plants, the native plants that have bloom, those bees will show up.
I did see a question way back in the chat in the middle of all my link.
I was actually scrolling through. Tell me what you saw.
Someone asked if there were any lists of bees, native bees for the southeastern U.S.
Well, we have lists of bees for Maryland, and the answer is yes, there are lists of bees for the Southwest or Southeast. Actually, it doesn't matter. There's lists for both. But the best thing is to email me about that, because it's on the mapping feature of Discover Life. And then there's different publications, usually by state. Some states don't have even a list, but it's available and compiled online. I can give guidance on how to extract that. Or point them in
do you want to put your email in chat again for folks? That might be great.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. And when it comes to native species, how do we determine selection there? Do we let just whatever grows if we want? Do we intentionally plant things? What do we do about that?
Yeah. So it depends, right? So if you have a specific objective, for example, that you want your orchard pollinated, then you would choose from spring blooming plants to increase that within the region. If you are interested, and then so on and so forth, you might be interested in your your sunflower crops. You might be interested in blueberries. You might be interested in squash. Squash, for example, have their very own native bee that only goes to squash, and so forth. So you would look at what's blooming similarly at the same time. It can get complicated. I wouldn't worry about it unless you like those sort of complications. So in a very general conservation approach to sustaining native bees and native plants in the area, and many other things that also are dependent on those plants, it would be native plants primarily. I always sneak in a few zinnias, running from as early in spring as possible to as late in the fall as possible, with a stepping stone of plants bloom throughout that time period. And don't worry about the details. But you can, but the problem is sometimes people feel overwhelmed by the complexity. So you can go to a lot of nurseries now have a native plant selection, and you can also go to in Maryland, you can go to the Maryland Native Plant Society, maintains a page of native plant nurseries, or ones that highly specialize on it. And there's quite a few. It depends on your region as to, how available they are, but there's a lot.
Has anybody on the call today had particular experience with an outfit in the region that they would want to recommend? I'm also thinking about master gardener help. Sometimes you can get some good advice there. I know at my local farmers market, they show up to have a table so people can come and ask questions several times a season. If you don't know how to find them, it's typically available through your extension office, no matter what state you're in.
And master gardeners and master naturalists, depending on the county, they might have that too, are specifically trained as part of their program in working with native plants, and maybe not so much the pollinators per se, but that's something that's emphasized in both those programs.
I'm scrolling through this amazing list of resources that Sam asked us to put in chat, and my thinking is I'm going to turn that into some kind of a shareable document and add that to what we include with the recording in our newsletter. So keep your eyes
out. Some
of
it's very technical. So, and some of the links are probably bad because they're ancient. It's an ancient list for my part. So that's probably very valuable.
So way down the list, there are also a couple of local campaigns that you might want to know about. One is just called the Bee Shore campaign. It's a Maryland-based program. And then as part of Field Watch, there's a bee check component for folks who are interested in making sure that their fields are registered for an alert if there's spraying going on. And so both of those are things that may be of interest if we have any growers on the call. Other questions? We have just a few more minutes.
Would you like to ask as a group or through the chat?
Oh, you're welcome to do it verbally, Glenn.
Okay.
Come on in.
So I have a question. I work with local grape growers, and many spray insecticides. What time of day are most native bees active, and how can I advise the growers to spray non-active times for those bees to avoid damaging the local population?
This would be true of soybeans too. When you're laying out your insecticide, you want to avoid the hot spot times. A little bit depends on temperature, but a 9 to 3 p.m. is when most of the activity is. So the more you can push it to early in the morning and late in the evening, the fewer bees you're going to impact. That's not completely true for every species. So for example, bumblebees have an ability to actually generate a little heat. And so they can come out earlier and they can go to sleep later. Something like the squash production is an early morning system. So there are bees, the squash bee that I mentioned there, they come out in the gray part of dawn. But by noon, everything's done in that field. So, but in general, avoiding that mid time period. And if you're in vineyards, which really don't have bees visiting the grapes, but do have bees visiting what is often pretty common now, which is the rows, the interstitial parts of the rows with clover and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, early in the morning, late in the afternoon to evening.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks for the question. We have another question from Donna. If neonic-coated soybeans are planted, will the bees not be harmed by working the blooms?
I'm unsure of that. I think people have looked at it. First of all, let's back up. There is no reason to put neonics on as a seed coat on soybeans because it doesn't help the soybean productivity. Corn, different story. Soybeans, not necessary. It's just like a common practice. Now, we do know that certain neonics, if you do a soil treatment, the plant will take up so much neonicotinoids that they basically produce toxic pollen, and huge bee kills have occurred mostly on blooming trees where it's very obvious. So I'm not sure, and let's back up. So sometimes the impact of something like neonicotinoids and other insecticides is sublethal. So in other words, it makes them dumb, can't find their way back home. There are not a lot of dead bees, but their reproduction tanks or all kinds of things go on. They didn't get a full lethal dose, but they got, it's like smoking 100 packs of cigarettes a day. Like something's going to happen, but not right away.
So a follow-on to that, Sam, that is a curiosity of mine. If we're supporting native bees in other ways, does it stand to reason that then their populations might rebound or be bigger in the first place because they have other sources of fuel and pollen and nectar? I don't know.
Yeah. So if you look at, let's say, you have a farm and your objective is to increase the amount of bloom available so that you get increased pollination, which is a good objective. Well, there's a great deal of secondary benefits there. So first of all, you have many other kinds of creatures. Many of them are predators and other things that will also move into the crop field to help control insects. And you have other bees that are like, I don't really care about soybeans. So beans, for example, have a relatively limited set of bees that work on them. So your flowers outside will support those bees, like leafcutter bees, and they will move in because there's so much more available. And the average amount of pollen and nectar in a bloom is going to be so great there that they're going to abandon the edges and then move back in when the crop is done. But other bees are just going to stick with that planted area. And that's just a good thing, right? It's part of stewardship. And we can plant many different kinds of plants. That's always better. And so, yes, is the answer. You're doing a good thing, even if you don't have crops. And certainly if you want to do a little inspection, like my rule of thumb is if you own a piece of property and you have a house in the middle of it, let's say, maybe you want to shoot for something like 20% of that property having lawn, and the rest should be either wild. The best thing is that you didn't cut it all down to begin with or have the bulldozer guys scrape it, or planted back in beds that can be formal to informal edges along woodlands. So managing the woodland edges by just simply mowing it once a year in the winter when equipment can get in, so usually in the fall, is super beneficial. And when you're not mowing, you're not using carbon, you're not polluting, because equipment that does mowing has very few regulations in terms of air quality control. You're saving money, you're saving time. Why wouldn't you do that? The answer is you're afraid of what your neighbors will say.
Or you live in a highly restricted homeowners association situation, or some combination of both.
Right.
But I liked your idea of you can plant these kinds of things in a managed way. It can be your garden or your landscaping. It doesn't have to be just the wild version of way.
Yeah. I mean, you can let your whole yard go, but someone's going to mow it when you're on vacation for you. And the other way to look at it is you want that front for the forward facing part of your house to present really well. And so you want a really string trim, beautiful sidewalk edge, curbside appeal kinds of things. And so people are like, you know, that's part of the handshake of being a homeowner. And then what they found is that if you behind that have beds with paths or not with paths, that you have kind of free reign. Like you can grow all kinds of things in there. And they're like, I'm not sure why you chose those plants, but I'm okay with that because the front part is looking good.
So we have two more questions. We're at 12:45, so these will probably be our last couple. Okay. Marlene says that her neighbors think bees are dangerous, and what should she tell them?
Yeah, so a couple things. We are only allergic to honeybees. The rest of the bee species, so the native bees, we're not allergic to, so they could sting you a million times. Not recommended. And they wouldn't. About a quarter of those bees, the females, which the males don't sting at all, the females physically cannot penetrate your skin. So it's not a problem. No bee, including honeybees, defends flowers. So when you put up flowers, it's not like you're not bringing a stinging issue in. Now, if you grab a bee, maybe you'll get stung. But who grabs bees? Children do. But that's how they learn.
Excellent. The questions are suddenly ratcheting up as our time is winding down. Melissa is asking about cultivars. So, you know, in terms of a host plant, are cultivars okay? Never sure whether native cultivars are okay or if I have to buy a.
So the short, because we have little time, short answer is always better to go with what we call the straight native. In other words, seed gathered in the wild, planted, good. When you get a cultivar, you're getting a product manufactured by a seed company, let's call it. The genetics are absolutely uniform because it has to present exactly the same way every time. So everything's vegetatively produced. Additionally, depending on how far into the system of cultivar creation they have gone, they have probably necked down the pollen and nectar because no one says, I want to have a cultivar that produces unbelievable amounts of pollen and nectar. It's everything but that. So the plant will rob that system to create shorter, brighter, longer, bigger doubling of blooms. It just doesn't work out. So you still can have a lot of bees coming to those cultivars, but it's a crapshoot.
And then finally, we'll wrap up with Amanda's question, managing invasives like Canada thistle with supporting bee habitat in field waterways, for example.
Yeah. So a lot of times your invasive weed problems are at your turnaround, like if you're doing row crops, or at turnarounds and other kinds of places, which basically that's where you would concentrate on your weed control. You can also do spot treatments instead of like broadcasts. And you can also have fairly wide verges so that that area that's the furthest from the field is managed with a mow once a year, unless and then, you know, as a farmer, you're paying attention like, oh my God, that area has Canada thistle moving into it. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to control it if you want and go back to a different system. So again, you know, I have a lot of faith in the farmer approach, which is I know what my objectives are, native bloom throughout the year or something, and I'm going to follow a path which will wind around in producing that, you know, do some things, then discover that that's not optimal, or I have a weed problem, or I can't get my equipment in the spring, you know, all kinds of things. So it's not a one answer to that. It's just some suggestions, and then your observations will allow you to tailor it.
All right. You all have been inquisitive and curious, and hopefully some of this is lodging in your head, but you'll have another chance to listen to it again via recording. Sam, wonderful. Thank you for compressing everything into something we could fit into this slot. And everybody, I wish you all a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth and Amanda. I appreciate being on to talk to people who are doing more of the grower end of things.
Take care, everybody.
All right.